All right, welcome on everyone to a post trade deadline edition of Dunc'd On, and we still I decided to leave it open because people are still signing up, are offering that great deal, 35% off on Dunc'd On Prime using the code MOCKDeadline25, where you can get all of our great stuff, including Dan Feldman's Daily Dunks and our podcasts 5 days a week, although we are actually going to take a little time off for All-Star break. Every Hollinger and Duncan too, access to our cap sheets, and that will lead us in to this, Danny. I know that I said we're going to start at 1:30, but I then rescinded that, and we are now starting at 1:45 Pacific.
So are you saying there was a failure to satisfy a condition of the podcast?
That was some very odd nomenclature, I thought, but would just tell people, if you've been under a rock, what happened there.
So what happened is one of the most surprising trades that happened around the trade deadline was Mark Williams going from the Charlotte Hornets to the Los Angeles Lakers for Dalton Knecht, Cam Reddish, and the Lakers' 2031 unprotected first-round pick. They did not have to include that for Luka, so they still had it. We did a long breakdown of that when it occurred. And after that, what happens is players go through physicals. And that can be, any number of, they go through any number of things, scans and whatever else. And as Fred Katz talked about today, one of the nuances of a trade that gets done tighter to the deadline is that basically the way this works is that once you get past the 3 Eastern deadline on deadline day, you can't modify trades. It has to become take it or leave it. And so, for example, the Caleb Martin deal that happened earlier in the week, the Dallas Mavericks got additional compensation from the Philadelphia 76ers. But what happened was the Lakers, we don't know what. All we know is Shams Charania reported that it does not involve Mark Williams back. There were multiple things that concerned them about the physical. And so the Lakers had a choice. Their choice was accept the trade as it is or rescind the trade. And they chose to rescind the trade.
Yeah, and we thought that Martin trade was going to be the most salient Donatas Bareiunas reference. That I believe is the last one that was straight up rescinded in this circumstance. Donatas Bareiunas was traded for a first-round pick from Houston to the Detroit Pistons, and after the deadline. And that also, these ones they're a little easier to rescind. Well, I guess this did involve some players too, but it was sort of just an asset for guy trade. Those can be easier to rescind because you always figure, well, we can hold on to this later, right? If the Lakers had traded someone who is like going to be a pending free agent, that was sort of like, or one of those deals were, one of the players involved was like that, right? Like, let's say a guy who was about to be a free agent got traded, and then the team that traded for him was not quite satisfied with his physical condition while he's about to be a free agent, and sending him back to his other team wouldn't really have been that useful. But in this case, it was just an asset for guy trade. And so the Lakers like, well, we can use those assets at another time for our team. Of course, that leads them without a good center. There are a few buyout options, but nothing amazing there so far. But Mark Williams had this back issue. The reporting has indicated that it wasn't the back, but there were multiple other issues. He also has missed time with this foot tendon strain earlier in the season and took a while to make his debut. But I wonder what it was that they found, because Charlotte should have, because the way this works is you try to exchange as much as possible beforehand so you don't end up in this situation. And clearly the Lakers found something that they just weren't comfortable with.
And inevitably in these sorts of circumstances, you see people who go, oh, well, they realized it was a bad deal and they want to get out from it. That doesn't really happen in the NBA. It's more a circumstance where, the people who wanted the deal to happen are the people who agreed to it. And so they want it to go, but there was something that freaked them out. And you feel for Mark Williams because he was about to go into what seems like it would have been a very good situation for him, not only playing with Luka Doncic and LeBron James, but also being a young guy on the Lakers who was about to be extension eligible. So if he had a good year, maybe he could have gotten a real significant commitment. And then now he's still extension eligible. It'll just be with the Charlotte Hornets. And this is a factor in that thought process. And then if no extension agreement is reached, he'll be restricted, presumably in the summer of 2026. So
yeah, well, and they've been very fastidious to not say what it actually was,
right,
which is kind of annoying to me.
It is annoying, especially as people who want no information. And I mean, the other question with us is going to be, well, does this affect his availability this year? Because while Mark Williams has missed a bunch of time this year, he was playing when the trade happened. Like he was playing right before it. So it's not a circumstance where like, oh, he's dealing with this blank issue and then that's been keeping him out, but it's just way worse. That's sort of, it seems like what happened with Caleb Martin, where it's like, it's a more extreme issue. It's going to be a delayed return. This is presumably something entirely different.
Yeah, and we have this comment that hopefully the league investigates what happens in Charlotte, maybe a potential draft fine for Charlotte. And when that has happened previously, it's been because not enough was disclosed ahead of time. The trade went through. The guy had some sort of an issue that didn't show up on the physical, but part of the reason it didn't show up on the physical was that there was an allegation that they weren't ever told about this, right? Like the Drew Holiday stress reaction in the lower leg thing going from Philly to New Orleans is a big part of this, or a quintessential example of that, where he develops these issues later, and then you can say, well, you didn't tell us about this. He said he's been having pain in his leg for X amount of time, and we didn't know about it. Therefore, we didn't have all the information. We couldn't do our physical. This is not going to lead to any kind of discipline because the Lakers are the ones who did this and found the things that they weren't happy with. And so they just rescinded the trade. Like in theory, you're just taking them right back to where they started. Now, yes, it is after the trade deadline, but that is the risk that you take by making this deal that close to the deadline. So I would be shocked. There isn't really a precedent for any kind of discipline for a team in this situation. The Lakers found something, and I mean, it'd be one thing if the Hornets, if the Lakers had a claim that the Hornets intentionally hid something from them, and then he was on the team, because that's where it comes from, right? The guy's on the team, and we got damaged goods. They just rejected the damaged goods to begin with, so they're right back where they started. They can't really say that they were damaged once you get it. Oh, well, there's an opportunity cost. We could have gone and traded for someone else or whatever. Like that's just getting too attenuated. You're not going to get anything in that circumstance.
Yeah, and it's also like, what are you trying to redress here? Like the Lakers couldn't go after another center. Like that's just a risk that happens with something else. They could still get somebody on the buyout market, though it is important to note, since the Lakers are over the first apron, they can't get anybody who's making more than the non-taxpayer mid-level. We don't know exactly who's going to get bought out at this point. I don't know if that's going to narrow the field too much. If you think of Ben Simmons as a center, then Ben Simmons is off the table. He's already signed with the Clippers. But outside of that, the opportunity cost, it probably would have been a different trade.
So the most famous rescindment, at least in recent NBA history, maybe there were some earlier that I'm not aware of, was Tyson Chandler going to OKC,
right,
from New Orleans. And that was a trade that OKC actually rescinded. I think that was at the 2010.
I think it was 2009.
2010. Was it 2000? No, I think it was the 2010 deadline, because they ended up getting Kendrick Perkins later instead. But regardless, Tyson Chandler would later win Defensive Player of the Year and maybe be the second best player on that Dallas championship team in 2011. And OKC always had Kendrick Perkins, or just guys who weren't that good. Like if they had Ibaka and Tyson Chandler together, they almost certainly would have won a championship, but they were conservative. They didn't like something. I think it was something related to his foot. And he ended up having a good career and made it through the rest of his career. Now, Chandler was much later on at that point, but OKC, much like the Lakers, they had a young group. They're like, well, if there are going to be long-term issues, that's what we're requiring for. We don't want to deal with this. So maybe it'll turn out that Mark Williams goes back to Charlotte and he has a career like Tyson Chandler did, and none of this stuff ever pops up. And the Lakers may end up having egg on their face. The Thunder certainly did. They never won a championship. And particularly with respect to this season, they're not, as much as I was concerned about Mark Williams and his defensive impact and lack of experience, they're not going to get anyone who's going to be as good as he would have been, assuming he were healthy. And so the Lakers, I can't tell you that they made the right decision here. They obviously saw something that they didn't like. I mean, this could also honestly be the result of the way that they have operated lately, and they haven't had as much of a process. They've tried to actually keep things very close with respect to like it being Rob Pelinka generally and Jeannie Buss, and they're the ones negotiating things. That's what happened with the Luka trade, and that was good. They got Luka, but it wouldn't shock me, honestly, if they agreed to this trade and then medical got involved.
Right.
And like the process only started there. That would be more than Charlotte hiding something. That to me seems more likely that the Lakers, because they've kind of had this insular decision-making process of late, if they follow that, Rob Pelinka wants to keep everything quiet. You don't want to let Prize Dalton Connect know that he could be in trade talks or whatever. And the Lakers, once you do get above that top group, there's a ton of media there. They leak like a sieve beyond that top group. So that's probably part of why they've decided to start doing it this way. But that to me could be it. It's just that like medical didn't have a say and a chance to sign off on it before the deal was agreed to. And then they couldn't get it together to get the physical before then.
Yeah, and I believe there's been some changeovers in the Charlotte medical team as the ownership transition, so maybe there's even something there. The Tyson Chandler rescindment was in February of 2009.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there are a bunch of articles about it written by people that we still know, like Chris Broussard, Mark Steinhead at the ESPN page, and various other stuff there. It's like it's funny to see like where people were then. But yeah, I mean, it's and again, I'm happy you brought up the Tyson Chandler example, because this is not a death sentence for Mark Williams' career or anything like that. It's just, it was an evaluation by this medical staff at this point in time, and we will have to find out whether.
And it's not that Mark Williams is going to suck going forward. It's just that we think the risk makes it from, we didn't want to give up this much for him anymore. As we noted, this is a big risk to fire this many bullets on Mark Williams.
Yeah, it is. And it'll be, I mean, now the Lakers have this resource available for them, not now, but in the 2025, I know what year it is, 2025 offseason, and theoretically the 26th trade deadline.
But they surely must have seen something that was pretty concerning because of what we talked about, that they knew they were just going to be back with no center at all for this season. Now, I think it's more about, and that's maybe what they're thinking too, that this is more about who the center is going to be with Luka. But as we talked about, as John and I talked about, firing that bullet on an unproven player like Mark Williams is just a very high risk, although potentially high reward move to make. But I didn't like the trade for them to begin with. So I think even if they're not going to have another center, they, if they can't have traded for like Clint Capella or something like that now instead, I still think they're better off in the long term. But where does this leave LA now?
I mean, it leaves them without a center that we trust. Jackson Hayes started their win over the Indiana Pacers on, I believe that was Friday. So we'll, and the Lakers, they're not going to have a ton of financial flexibility in all likelihood in the summer of 2025. So we're probably looking maybe taxpayer mid-level, but potentially maybe a trade that looks like this. But I mean, we brought up some of the other guys in the mock deadline. You had them getting Walker Kessler. Maybe something like that comes to play. But for this year, it's maybe they get lucky with a buyout guy, but probably not.
Yeah, in terms of who's available right now, Daniel Tice has already been waived by OKC. You would imagine that they would go hard after him. They have a big role to offer, but he's not really, he's more kind of along the lines of Kleba as an offensive player. Kleba is going to be out 2 months. Maybe he gets back in April. I wouldn't want to put many eggs in that basket, though. And, they still have Koloko on a two-way. I can't even remember the other guy. Well, actually, I think they waived him, right? They waived Armel Traore.
They did.
And then they've got, I mean, if you guys in the comments want to throw out some other examples for me, if you think I'm missing any of these buyout guys, but Marvin Bagley is someone that actually, if he could get healthy,
it sounds like the Grizzlies are keeping him.
Yeah.
Because Taylor Jenkins talked about how he's not going to be available until after the All-Star break. And you wouldn't usually say that by a guy who's getting bought out right away.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they're just going to hold on to him, and maybe he could be an expiring contract or like a sign and trade guy in the offseason. Also, the Grizz, if they were going to hold on to him, that could also just be them trying to like get some money out of him for the buyout too.
Sure.
But he MB 3 years, $37 million would be a good fit offensively. He also just his athleticism has really declined with all these injuries he's had, so I don't know if he can even be effective as a role man anymore. And then Alex Len is out there, another
he's going to the Pacers.
Oh, that's right. Yes, thank you. I did see that. Then I mean PJ Tucker maybe for a small ball look. KJ Martin if he gets bought out. Even Ben Simmons would have probably helped them, but he's going to the other LA team now. Former Clutch guy. So it really seems like Tice is the only one that is sounds like Tice is headed to Europe from overseas reports. Is that the Keith Smith in the comments here? Keith would know that better than me. Or is it just a Keith Smith? So
either way, yeah.
So they really feel free to if I'm missing anybody, throw anybody else out there in the comments.
JaVale McGee.
Mo Bamba. Mo Bamba is easily the best option. JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard. Dwight's had a little bit of drama around him.
Boban.
This is good. This is good. The trade fell through because they thought they were trading for Mark Edwards, but they got Mark Williams.
Damn it all.
That's great. Keith says, I don't know about thee, but I'm the Keith Smith that you know.
He's one of the Keith Smiths.
Yeah. All right. Mo Bamba, easily the best option. This is a dark timeline that we're on. I agree with probably both of those statements. Yeah, so let's get to, I guess for LA, just to finish up on kind of where this leaves them. I think they would have been screwed against Denver regardless. I talked about that with John on Friday. They just had no one to guard Jokic. Like Mark Williams trying to do that, he would have just fouled out in 3 seconds. And OKC, I think they never had the talent anyway. And I just didn't think that Mark Williams was going to, he would have really helped them offensively. That is a little bit of a problem. Jackson Hayes can at least go get an alley-oop. That's probably good enough for Luka, you hope, on the offensive end. But, yeah, defensively, they're just going to be very limited. I just don't know how they're going to stop people particularly well. But, maybe LeBron, Austin Reeves, and Luka will each put up 40 every game, and they'll be fine. I do want to see LeBron and Luka and how that's going to fit together. But this team, they can try and go small. You could go Luka, Rui, DFS, LeBron, and Reeves. That's probably their 5 best players. And they could try to just switch and just slow things down enough. They'll get murdered on the boards. They have no shot blocking with that group. But maybe you just try to stay in front of people and keep them out of the paint, and then just outscore them the other. That's probably their best group. Let's see here. I guess that's about it. Actually, this is a good question here. Where do you rank the Lakers in the West right now? As a playoff team, it looks like they're going to be top 6. They're on a pretty good train there.
Okay, so OKC is pretty clearly in a separate category. At least from them. What's interesting is because there's this running thing about how I don't particularly trust the Grizzlies and the Rockets. They're both talented teams, but it's just, do they figure it all out? I think that the Lakers, I would say that I'd probably have the Lakers, especially because they won't have home court. I'd probably I'd have them as the underdog in those series, but way more than a puncher's chance. We're talking with those teams, we're probably talking in the 55-45, 60-40 kind of category. And it might even be cleaner than that if the fit is good. Nuggets are a tough fit because of Jokic. That's just, and there isn't a way to band-aid around it with the Lakers because they don't even have really 4s in that sort of a sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, as much as the West has all these like good teams, they don't have that many great teams. Like that Lakers team could,
No.
I think they could beat the Clippers. I mean, oh my god, if we get a Lakers Mavs series, like if the scriptwriters can put that together, I would be very pleased. And then I'd probably pick
probably most likely in the play. Well, yeah, I don't.
It could be the 4-5. I that wouldn't stun me.
I mean,
I guess
the Mavs are 6 games behind the 5 seed in the loss column right now.
That's true.
There's not much time to make that up. I mean, Houston was totally free falling. Hadn't they lost 6 straight before they won today?
Yes.
Against yeah, but we'll actually let's move to them now. But I do think the Wolves are going to be heard from as well. The Clippers, Kings, and Golden State. We'll talk about them too. Like the West is pretty interesting, but to me, Denver is the clear number 2 and OKC is the clear number 1. Like Denver could maybe lose, but I don't like. There's no team that Nikola Jokic is going to be scared of in a playoff series right now, and they still have Jamal Murray starting to play better too. So, let's talk about actually then AD's debut in Dallas. What did you think of that?
I thought that it's important to note that part of what you made a reference to Houston's free fall is that they've lost 6 straight, but a lot of those all of them came without Jabari Smith Jr., but I think the last 3 of those 6 came without Fred VanVleet as well. And so I thought that the Mavericks defense in that first half where they just completely demolished the Houston Rockets in that first half. They were up 20 basically. I thought that Anthony Davis was fabulous on both ends of the floor. But I also thought that it's an important piece of context. I think this Mavericks defense will be good against everyone. Was that it was an extremely favorable matchup because the Houston didn't really have those advantage generators that would really stress out the Mavericks, the weaknesses in their perimeter defense. And then they also didn't have enough spacing where they were going to punish anything else. So I thought that they started the game with Gafford and Anthony Davis together, that it was a perfect, against a good team, but in a flawed team, a perfect example of who this Mavs defense would be the absolute most destructive against. Now, credit to doing it, but that was something I wanted to mention at the outset. Not to denigrate what AD did or anything like that, but just as a piece of context, because they were so good.
No, absolutely. And the Rockets 15 of 31 at the rim and 8 of 28 from floater range. So if you're doing some addition in your head, like I'm about to do right now, that is 23 out of 59 in the paint. That is, and they actually were saved a little bit by going 9 of 13 for mid range, but they got up under 33 pointers. And yeah, it definitely, I'm not going to say it was proof of concept because as you noted, like this is a Houston team that really wants to get to the basket. But I thought the one part that did work pretty well was that AD just went to work against some of these smaller Houston guys. Like they're starting Tari Eason and Amen Thompson, and AD was able to get to a short range floater. And he shot well too. His jumper was hitting. He actually handled the ball in pick and roll twice and shot jumpers off the dribble. One of them was a 3 that went down.
Was that the 3 he popped on Şengün?
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah. And then, so that looked really good. And then his one-on-one scoring was good. He had a lot of energy. He was hitting the offensive glass as well. And it was to the point where Houston actually started 2 bigs in the second half, which they started Şengün and Adams together, which I would be shocked if those guys had played any minutes together other than, defensive rebound or offensive rebounding, a free throw in the last minute of the game type of possessions. So I thought that forcing Houston to adjust to them in that way was pretty solid, and AD looked spry. Then, of course, he had to leave the game. It was talked about as like a groin and quad spasm, which is that's what he said afterwards, and he doesn't think he's going to miss much time. That actually is nomenclature that's been used for him throughout his Lakers tenure, where he just like couldn't get this muscle to like loosen up or something. So I hopefully that's not going to be something where he misses a lot of time, but he looked very fresh. And like with Jimmy Butler, part of the thing with these veteran guys is like, yeah, if they're feeling good, like and feeling athletic that day, they can look amazing. It's more just about what it's going to look like over the course of the entire season.
And just to walk people through it, how big what appears to be Jason Kidd's intended starting five is. I mean, you have Kyrie, then you have Klay Thompson, who at this point in his career is probably more of a 3 or a 4 than a 2.
Yeah.
PJ Washington playing small forward, Anthony Davis playing power forward, Daniel Gafford playing center, and then especially with Derek Lively being unavailable, Davis is playing backup center, and then you bring in more forward-sized guys like Najee Marshall, and then the guards Exum and Dinwiddie off the rotation. Then Max Christie, who's actually played a lot and has been just drilling his threes since the trade to Dallas. But I thought that Davis, it was funny because I watched a fair amount of film of De'Aaron Fox and Zach LaVine as well. I watched full games and stuff. Is like these guys were shooting a lot of jumpers early on. I was like, oh yeah, was shooting a lot of jumpers, but it makes sense because you haven't figured out what the team is running yet. So that's something that you can do within the flow without completely getting everything there. And Davis's jumper was really going in that first half. He scored 24 points, I think, in the first half. Had 16 in the first quarter, and it was so funny because it's another one of those it's impressive, but also the context where these Houston Rockets forwards are very good and they're big for forwards, but they're not big for Anthony Davis. And so he's getting Eason into position. He's getting Amen into position. Those guys just aren't quite as big as he is. And I think there was one on Jayshawn Tate as well. And
but those also are not shots he's going to hit at quite the same rate
exactly.
That
and but it was great to see him feed off of the Dallas crowd too. They were really happy to see him, which of course, considering some of the reaction to the trade, completely justified if I were a Dallas fan. That it's good to see him play well and everything like that. And so I do firmly believe, and we talked about this when the trade happened, that Dallas will be a very, very good defensive team. And their offense was definitely good enough in this one, even with Davis functionally. He played more than just the first half, but he was, I think the injury happened in the third quarter. But it was, we'll see where all of this fits together. And now that Exum is back, also, even if Exum's not the greatest advantage creator, he can help get some stuff for them in transition. And I want to see what this Mavericks team without Luka Doncic is able to do in terms of getting easy buckets, getting good looks, all that type of stuff, whether it's transition, offensive rebounding, or things off of cuts and everything else like that. Because if they can piece together enough of that, I think they could, if they're healthy going into the postseason, they could be a pretty tough out.
Yep, I think that's probably right. I mean, the objection to the trade was for the next 5 or 10 years. This one, I could easily construct a narrative where they'd be as good. In terms of a median outcome, I thought Luka gave them an upside that they just don't have anymore. I mean, if they brought Luka back and been healthy, I probably would have considered them to be the second best team in the West. And Matt says it does seem like Davis is gonna plus Gafford will create real matchup problems for the other teams on offense. We'll see. This is the first team that went up against him and doesn't play a real 4. And yeah, I think if you can get them to play like Stephen Adams and Şengün together, that you have kind of won in that regard. But I think other teams will also be able to start to, and especially when AD's not hitting his jumper. He was hitting his jumper in this game, and that changed it. We saw that in 2020. And then there's also, of course, the health component. One other thing I'm actually interested to see is how does AD fit into the Mavs transition defense culture? Because he's historically been pretty terrible at that, and they are amazing at getting guys to run back. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Butler's return, and like what you were saying about Houston with the two going up against the two bigs, including Anthony Davis. I felt like Jimmy Butler going against, shall we say, not the most physical Bulls group, was a pretty good matchup for him. But what were your takeaways from his debut with Golden State?
First off, it was an absolutely wild game where the Chicago Bulls led by 24 points in the third quarter and then trailed at the end of that same quarter, which I'm sure I have seen it before, but I couldn't remember it. And Curry had 24.
Well, it was wild too, because the Bulls went on a 12-0 run, right at the start of the quarter, right? To go up 24. I don't know if it was 12-0, but it was. I think it started.
I think it was 15-0 actually.
Yeah, it was 14 at halftime. It was 69-55 at halftime. But yeah, and then of course they came back and went crazy.
And so I thought the reminder that I had, because really the only adept foul drawer, and Jimmy's in a different caliber of this, that the Warriors have had during this run was Kevin Durant, and how that does really give them another element. And I thought that Butler getting there 13 times, so he took basically half of the Warriors' free throw attempts in the entire game. Curry actually got there 8 times, which is an indicator that the Bulls are not the same as a lot of other teams. But I thought that Butler was kind of he had to figure a lot of things out. The Warriors are not, they're not the plug and play team for pretty much anybody. But it gave the Warriors, and I'm going to be really interested in how Curry uses Butler in the non-Curry minutes, a place to go and a way to get easy offense. I was just rattling off all these ways for the Mavericks to do it. One of them I didn't mention was the free throw line. And I think that there will be times that will absolutely be a sop for the Warriors, will be a help for the Warriors, and also kind of help them from some of these really bad lulls that their offense can get into, honestly, with or without Curry this year. And so having somebody who gets to the line, who slows the game down, and also who competes defensively when he's not trying to set his team on fire, that all of that will really help them.
So the way that he was used, I thought, was fascinating, because you're right. He certainly gives them someone else who can score, but Jimmy's never been, at least except when he's being CAJ, as Seth would call him in the playoffs, consistently aggressive Jimmy. He's more been like a mid-20s usage guy at the most. And they didn't, and the Warriors aren't going to do this, like they didn't set him up much in pick and roll. Every once in a while, he would ISO out of the post if he had an easy matchup, of which there were several going against.
Oh yeah, he got one on Giddey where he just like weight roomed him.
Yeah, and yeah, as mentioned, the Bulls didn't exactly have the toughness to deal with Jimmy. That's part of how he got 13 free throw attempts. But the way he was being used the most actually was just on quick slips to the rim and being used as a target, and Draymond trying to find him under the basket. And particularly when he's interacting with Steph, like the Warriors didn't have anyone who could roll to the basket and actually be good. And Jimmy, I thought the way he played as a roll man was very underrated in Miami, because he's very good at finding the time to slip out of there. And then if you switch it, he's just going to be physical, and you could throw it over the top to him. He'll draw fouls. If you let him catch it there, he's just going to go right through that guy. So it's not very little of the work that he did. And this is part of how he's able to put up these very efficient games with 25 points on 12 shot attempts and 11 of 13 from the line. The big way that he's able to put up these games is that he's really more of an opportunity scorer, which works well with the Warriors' ball movement. Not that Miami was not a good ball movement team as well. But I thought the biggest thing that caused problems was just some of these quick slips, getting steals in transition. They've been so bad in transition the last few years. He can probably help there. And just having another very smart player. I mean, the things you always hear out of Miami is just you don't understand like how smart this guy is on both ends. And then also to be able to force some turnovers as well. He had one steal in the passing lane that they just not the type of play Golden State's been making since DeAnthony Melton went down and Anderson kind of got minimized. And so that was, I think, he's going to make much more of a difference just in the little margins of the game, which frankly, they've largely lost a lot.
Yeah.
Whether it's just getting the odd offensive rebound, quick transition play, back cut, good help sneaking up behind the post player for a steal and just little bits throughout the game that generally make you more efficient. That's where he makes the biggest difference, particularly throughout, I would say, a regular season game. And every once in a while he can get crazy hot and start scoring, but that's usually more of a playoff thing and in the right matchup. And at 35, it's really more just kind of finding these advantages throughout the game is where he makes the biggest difference.
It's true. And having somebody who also can make good decisions, like passing and everything else, like I think there will be avenues for the Warriors to use him. Like one of the benefits of Jimmy Butler compared to Draymond is that he's a much more willing and aggressive scorer as a short roll guy. Like if you give Jimmy Butler the ball in that position, it's not like Draymond where the toggle is always switched to pass, where that's just what he can do, or maybe he'll airmail a layup every once in a while. He can draw foul. He can try to finish himself. He can also make the pass, of course. And I think that will challenge defenses in different ways. And one of the theories that Kerr can use is they can actually use Jimmy Butler the way they use Draymond without Draymond on the floor. And in terms of the context, I agree with you. I thought that Draymond was looking for Butler a lot through some lobs that were a little bit off guide, a little bit off that tried to finish or everything else. But Draymond was looking for your new team and everything else. But when the trade happened, beyond it being a jaw dropper and all that, we wondered what, if any, corresponding moves the Warriors make. And this to me is one of the bigger challenges that Steve Kerr is going to have to deal with for the rest of this year. Jimmy Butler will be on the Warriors longer than that, but they walk away from the deadline with their only big man, if we're counting like taller than Draymond Green, who can space the floor, being Quentin Post, who just got elevated from a two-way to a standard contract, has plenty of flaws as a player. And so in this game, Quentin Post played 20 minutes, Trace Jackson-Davis played 4, which was just garbage time, and then Kevon Looney played spot 11. And so how they run their rotations, and maybe it's going to be a lot more Draymond at the center, and that's just how they do it. They just don't have forward-sized guys who can shoot anymore.
Yeah, and who are the two guys going to be next to their big three now? I imagine it'll be Jonathan Kuminga, and maybe it'll be Quentin Post. It sounds like that guy is a very legitimate shooter. I think he's pretty limited in just about every other aspect of the game, but like he shoots it like a shooting guard. Like you throw it to him, he just fires the no dip 3 from the corner and it's in. Like he is definitely a legitimate shooting threat. And against a team like the Bulls, he's able to be pretty effective. Going up against say the OKC Thunder didn't look as good for him. And yeah, so how Kuminga fits into this role as well is going to be absolutely fascinating. Like he's going to probably have to be the one to guard the ball. If Kuminga had shown more defensive acumen, and particularly as a help defender, to where you could start to think of, like maybe they could have a group that could really switch. And obviously if you had 2016 Draymond instead of the current version, who was a better rim protector and rebounder, obviously he's still good, but he's not at the level he was at that point. And also was someone who could do a little more inside the arc, then I might actually be pretty high on what this group can do. But I think they're still going to just have too many holes. And yeah, like it looked great against the Bulls, but that's the Chicago Bulls. And also the other thing too is Jimmy is fresh right now, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout entire seasons, and his knees seem to be pretty messed up. Suffered another knee injury in the playoffs. So yeah, he looked great physically right now. It was a great comeback against the Bulls. Good start. They certainly, I think, have a better floor on a night-to-night basis if Jimmy is healthy. Like it wasn't this my objection. I wouldn't even say my objection. You were lower on it than me. But the reason I thought that it wasn't going to work mostly was just that I wasn't sure how much Jimmy could give them on a night-to-night basis. But this first night he did, and it was certainly going to make these guys more interesting, because I do enjoy watching the way that Jimmy plays cerebrally, and it's going to fit in well. Also the fact that he doesn't turn it over, that's another thing that you can look at as just a little kind of marginal thing to boost this group's efficiency, because they largely would not win those types of categories these last few years.
Unfortunately, so the Warriors' next game is Monday in Milwaukee. Giannis isn't going to play in that one. He's out through the All-Star break with this calf strain. And then the other game that the Warriors have, because seemingly they play every single game against Dallas, is I think they play Dallas on the day before the All-Star break. And so maybe we get a notable sample during those two games. But yeah, the Warriors, I agree with you. The Warriors are going to be much more interesting to watch moving forward, and we'll get to see how they can fare against a variety of different opponents. And I brought up before when we were talking about the Lakers' place in the West that no one's really running and hiding, but you still need the floor is a really important part here, because there are teams pushing from below. We'll probably get a little bit of an opportunity to talk about the Blazers, because I watched Zach LaVine play against them. But you have to kind of think about both those things. It's how can we go on a run, but also can we avoid getting knocked out?
Let's talk actually about De'Aaron Fox then.
Sure.
And he's now played 3 games in San Antonio. They are 1-2 in those games. They've been on a Southeast road trip. They lost to Charlotte without LaMelo Ball. That was a pretty rough loss. Down the end of that one, they managed to give up a wide open corner 3 to Miles Bridges, up 2. And then Fox, Eric Collins, the Hornets broadcaster, did a great job on this, noting that Fox's potential game winner was late. And it turned out to be in the end. But yeah, that was a tough end to end a game that you really needed to win. And then they also lost, blowing a 7-point lead late against the Magic. Anthony Black and Jonathan Isaac both hit threes when they weren't being guarded, but that kind of stemmed from the fact that they had to overreact to Paolo Banchero. They didn't really have anyone who could guard him. Paolo hit the game winner with about 30 seconds left on a fadeaway over Harrison Barnes, and then Wembanyama off a pick and roll switch, which we'll talk about a little bit. He tried to run pick and roll with Fox, and Wembanyama missed a long 2 over Anthony Black after they oddly kind of just dribbled the air out of the ball for about 15 seconds down 1, which I didn't get why they wouldn't have gone earlier, because then if you miss, you at least have a chance to foul or get a steal and then come back again down at most 3. But they just elected not to attempt that and just go for the game winner at the end. But as you've watched Fox, you watched their game against the Hawks on Wednesday. I watched this Magic game and some of the Charlotte game. What are your thoughts on Fox early in San Antonio's system? That Hawks game was his first game with them, right?
It was his first and his most successful. I had 24 on 11 to 22 from the field in that one, and also had 13 assists and only 1 turnover. And I thought that part of it was the recognition. So one thing that's notable is that Mitch Johnson is playing Fox alongside Chris Paul in the starting lineup. And so they're playing these 2 guards, and that is changing things in terms of their defensive assignment. So De'Aaron Fox was the primary on Trae Young in the Hawks game because they don't really have anybody else do it. If your choices are Chris Paul, De'Aaron Fox, and Devin Vassell, well, then you're going to have De'Aaron Fox take that assignment. And I thought that I've had these frustrations with Fox for a long time about like the possessions where he kind of takes it off a little bit offensively or defensively. He had some abysmal defensive possessions against the Hawks where he's just like wandering off of people, and it's not scheme. It's just like he's just not there. But when it worked, it looked great. I mean, so there were plays in that where like there was one where Victor Wembanyama had a block. I think it was on Onyeka Okongwu. And then De'Aaron Fox just darted down the floor and got a layup before the Hawks could even respond. And that element is going to be really useful. And the other one that was really useful is having another player on San Antonio who can generate mismatches, who can create panic within a defense. And that's going to make life a lot easier on Victor Wembanyama. While I personally didn't feel that De'Aaron Fox was the ideal player to do that, he does do that, and that will make life easier over the next few years, assuming he resigns.
Yeah, in the portion that I watched, I didn't think that the Wembanyama Fox connection was working yet. That was the thing that made people so excited initially, that those 2 in pick and roll would be unstoppable. And Fox, I've always thought, was only really an average passer for this player type, and it's going to take a while. Victor himself too is not amazing at pick and roll craft yet. Sometimes he's going to pop. Sometimes he's going to roll. Annoyingly, probably pops more than he rolls. I would like to see what happens if Fox could get downhill a little bit. There's a couple of plays where Fox would just get the screen and then they'd play it pretty conventionally, and Fox would just shoot a contested mid-ranger. I'm like, all right, you got to get something better than that if you're running pick and roll with Victor Wembanyama. Another time late in the Magic game where they're struggling to score, where they run a left side pick and roll, ends up getting iced and forced towards the baseline, and Fox attacks. Wembanyama is popped wide open at the 3-point line, just kind of waiting out there. Fox just goes all the way into the basket, gets too deep, and ends up getting it stolen by Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And Fox doesn't really have any experience playing with a pick and pop player. Obviously, that wasn't the way that Sabonis played. Sabonis is a way better screener than Wembanyama, probably a better passer at this point too. and he was going to roll to the basket and put more pressure on the rim consistently on every play in a way that Wembanyama wasn't. And also, I would say Sabonis was better at mashing on smaller players. That last play, they switched the pick and roll to put Anthony Black on Victor, and he just ended up taking a difficult jumper at the end. And I think teams are still pretty comfortable switching with Victor as the best way to do it. And so to me, it's really on De'Aaron Fox to beat that. But if you're putting your 4 on Victor, then a lot of times that guy could probably stay in front of Fox as well. So now in 3 games, our friends at Sport Radar have 11 picks that have led directly to a shot, either by Fox, Wembanyama, or somebody else. And that's not very many in 3 games, and it just hasn't been particularly successful. They also go left 100 or not 100% of the time, but they go left 73% of the time. Not a surprise with Fox, and they haven't gotten a single pass to a shot at the rim out of that, which is the biggest thing that I see. And they've taken a lot of shots out of mid-range, either for Wembanyama or Fox in those 11 plays. So it hasn't been so far an approach. And these aren't like unbelievable defensive teams. It's the first 2 that they played. I mean, did you see? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so here I think going through the Sport Radar stats, this to me is the most interesting and damning thing so far. Obviously, 11 picks. We're not going crazy here. 0 Fox shots to the rim, 0 shots to the rim for anyone else. So it's not generating those. Like either one of those would be great. Like it doesn't matter kind of how you get there. It just matters that you get there. And so the show so far, it's been bunch of mid rangers. I think 1 3-pointer in the 11, and that was a pass into a 3. And yeah, I wasn't particularly impressed with the Fox Wembanyama interplay. The game I watched was their first one, and they probably haven't practiced at all yet, just because you think about the sequence. They played 3 games in 5 days, like right after the trade. But it's that will be something that they're going to have to learn. And I'm never in the early part of it, especially for a guy who's going to be on a multi-year deal when this is not the best year of their partnership. Like it isn't the circumstance of like you brought in Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen into the Celtics and you're trying to win the championship this year. So it will take some time. And I think it will take some time also because Fox, you brought up that he's not the greatest passer. I've never thought of him as the most like intuitive player either. And Wembanyama, to his credit in many ways, is a hard guy to like wrap your brain around as a player. And so I think it's going to take them some time to figure it out. I mean, Fox got there with Sabonis, who is another unusual center, but it will probably take some time.
I thought it was also pretty interesting in this last game, one in which Jeremy Sohan was healthy, and they've really started using Sohan more as a backup center now, not playing him together with Victor nearly as much, which is something that I support. He basically was staggered from Victor throughout this Magic game. And Harrison Barnes, in part maybe because he had the experience to guard Paolo, played, I would guess, is pretty close to his most minutes of the season, and he closed it. And I did like I think the other reason maybe they went with Barnes too is that Stephon Castle was played a ton of minutes in that game and had a really good one. Or actually, I can't remember if it was that one or the previous one that someone was getting in my ear about him having 30 points. But
that was the Hornets game, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, I mean, I think having Barnes out there and Castle is just more important than Sohan at this point too. Like they do play those 2 together, but when you're playing Sohan at center, it's a little bit better. And so just having the spacing of Barnes, I think, is something where now that you have Fox, you have this pick and roll player, they should be able to space the floor more. I also thought that Devin Vassell was just looked too small out there trying to guard either Paolo or Franz Wagner. That's something that they need to think about going forward. So yeah, it hasn't been amazing for Fox so far. He's got 51% true shooting, but the greater thing is just you felt like he could be able to get to the basket more. And I thought that's one of his limitations in Sacramento too, is that it just a lot of mid-rangers, which in that great 23 season, he made all the time, and he hasn't made as many, and he hasn't been that great from 3 either. Speaking of the Sacramento Kings, where he used to be, Zach LaVine has replaced him there. What have you seen from him? You watched our game against the Blazers Thursday.
Super fun game. If you will indulge me after we talk about LaVine, I'll talk a little bit about the Blazers because they're a big story we've talked about a little bit, but deserves a little bit more attention overall. So I feel like we owe it to them. And one of the things that I was most excited about with Sacramento, with the concept of LaVine there, was LaVine's interplay with Valanciunas, or sorry, not with Valanciunas. That spoils where I'm going with this. And I thought that Sabonis, LaVine, the early stuff wasn't there wasn't too much in the way of action. So we talked about how Fox, Wembanyama, their 11 screenplays with those guys. They're only 16 with Sabonis. I think the Kings have played 3 as well. And I thought that some of it looked pretty good, but I actually thought that LaVine, maybe because he's a more common with some of the guys that LaVine's played with before, he had better chemistry in some of the Valanciunas minutes, which actually was really good for the Kings because if you remember, the non-Sabonis minutes have been an absolute disaster for Sacramento all year. And so having LaVine out there, having Valanciunas out there gave them a lot more places to go. And that was really useful in this contest against the Blazers. And I thought that LaVine, he had a few of those moments where you're like, oh yeah, this is the guy who can really give them some juice. He had a couple of really nice transition plays where he pushed it hard. And when Zach LaVine didn't settle for jumpers, I thought his fit in the offense looked fantastic. When he got downhill and when he was able to like make something happen in the action. And then when he settled, then it just becomes the question of how often does it go in. And he was 8 of 19 from the field, had a couple of big shots, but then also had a couple of possessions that he like kind of like the equivalent of like a give up where it was like, 10 seconds on the clock. They probably could have gotten something better. And so I think it will be up to Doug Christie, and then if they end up replacing Christie in the future, of like making sure that offensively you get the best parts of LaVine, because the best parts of him, I think, work fantastically with not only Sabonis, but with their forward rotation, because you have Keegan Murray, a guy that you have to defend, and of course DeRozan, who he's played with in the past. And also with Malik Monk, where in an ideal world, one of those guys is probably involved in the action. Monk and Sabonis have fabulous chemistry. And then the other guys just making the defense work, making sure that they can't relax on the weak side, all these other things. And there were a couple of points in the Blazers game where that happened and it looked great. But then there were other points where the Blazers were able to be very, very static and not get punished for it. And that just went terribly for the Kings.
Yeah, and DeRozan, obviously, he's played some with LaVine before.
Yeah.
and Fox is back with Harrison Barnes as well, hilariously now. But yeah, the fit between those two, other than the fact that they can be staggered as creators, has never been awesome, I would say, other than, LaVine fits well with DeRozan because DeRozan can go to work and LaVine can space the floor, but DeRozan probably doesn't help LaVine very much other than just maybe taking up the primary defender. But that's going to be really interesting to see between Monk, LaVine, DeRozan, even though Fox, I think, his effort defensively waxed and waned. It was probably at his best last year. He still was someone that you didn't feel like you could attack, and we'll see whether LaVine is able to be passable on that end under Doug Christie. But you said you wanted to talk a little bit more about the Blazers themselves.
Well, before that, I'll throw out a couple of LaVine plays that I think tell both parts of the story. So, first touch LaVine had was on the second possession of the game for the Kings. He got a rebound, pushed it all the way past Jeremy Grant for a finish that forced an immediate Chauncey Billups timeout. And it's like, that's the type of thing that Zach LaVine can do. He also had a really nice leak out where Malik Monk found him with a baseball pass. And it's like, that's another element that he can bring to play, push it a little bit hard. Of course, something that Fox has brought. And then probably the single best LaVine play from the entire game, he rejected a screen and just smoked Toumani Camara, who does not get beaten like that very often. Part of it was the threat of Sabonis on the screen, and part of it was just that LaVine is so fast that if you kind of if you try to anticipate the action and he can beat your anticipation, even at this age, he can still get down there really fast. But then two of the bad LaVine plays were they were 2-for-1s where, and our friend Seth Partners brought this up a number of times, like, a terrible shot in the 2-for-1 is not the same calculus as everything else. And so like there was one where it was like he just like forced a layup that had no chance. It's like, well, then you didn't actually get a shot. It's not actually 2-for-1. It's a 1-for-1 that you took a shitty shot. And then he did that again with like a deep three in the, I think it was the second and the third quarters were these two. And it just drove me up the wall because it's like you're not benefiting the team. And like I thought overall his shot choices were better in some moments, but those were terrible. The Blazers, I mean, so just because we brought it up, like I think they've won, is it 10 out of their last 11?
They lost today, I think.
Oh, they lost today.
Yesterday to Minnesota. And by the way, to correct myself earlier, thanks for pointing this out in the comments. LaMelo did play. He was back for that ankle issue in that win over the Spurs. But so they lost without to Minnesota without Anthony Edwards last night.
Correct. And so so they've won, I think, 10 out of 12. And what struck me in the game against the Kings, which they won, was how good their ball movement was. And we brought this up when we were talking about their deadline stuff, is that they're getting real contributions from their young guys. I thought that Shaedon Sharpe had a huge stretch at the beginning of the game where he was able to get downhill. He had, I think, like 12 points coming off the bench in the first quarter. And Scoot had some really nice moments, though his best one actually ended up failing. It was a play where he threw a really nice alley-oop to Ayton, but the pass was too low, so Sabonis got a finger on it and became a turnover. And the Blazers, at their best, to me, in this stretch, I mean, ball movement's been really good, is when they can get downhill. And when they can get downhill, it helps when you're playing against Sacramento, whose rim protection, even though they have a better center rotation now, the rim protection is still not fantastic. They have so many athletic guys, and they have guys who are getting better at making the good decisions, the unselfish decisions that are such a part of successful team basketball. And Avdi, I thought, even though this was not near his best game, he had some nice plays in this respect. And it was actually hilariously, like there was a couple stretches where DeAndre Ayton did really well, but he got to the line 4 times, but it's against Sabonis, and all the flaws between those guys coming together are pretty hilarious. But I thought that, the Blazers won this one 108-102. I'm still not completely sold, but I am completely sold on them being a significantly better team game in, game out than I expected at the start of the year, even though I picked their over and picked it pretty comfortably.
DeAndre Ayton has a 12.5 net rating over his last 12 games.
Wow.
And yeah, opponents are shooting very poorly from 3, under 30%. But even if you regress that back to league average, they would be comfortably above water during this stretch. And there's just a lot of guys who are playing, like Scoot Henderson, 12.6 net rating, Kamara, 14. So it hasn't just been a bunch of close wins. Like they have fucked up some teams, and actually some pretty decent teams at times. But again, we've noted how the January can sort of just be silly season in general because it's the dog days, and they will be one of the teams we'll be watching most closely after the break because, of course, they did not make a single move.
And Portland's remaining, they only have 2 games left before the break. They're both at Denver Monday and Wednesday, and so I'll probably watch at least one of those just to see how those 2 teams fare. See DeAndre Ayton against the similarly capable big.
Unfortunately, we were planning to discuss Luka Doncic's debut, but like ESPN, we were fooled, and now that apparently is going to be on Monday, and LeBron didn't play either, but it didn't matter. The Lakers still won against the Pacers, who were without Miles Turner in that one, but as Austin Reeves had 45 points. So we'll have to wait to see what Luka looks like. That might be a post-break discussion for us too.
And similarly disappointing. We probably weren't going to watch it because it was early, right, shortly before this on Sunday, but I had hoped to see Brandon Ingram in a Raptors uniform, but apparently the ankle injury that kept him out in New Orleans is going to keep him out longer. I haven't seen the timeline yet on that, but especially considering that part of what they got him for was this year, that'll be something worth watching. The Raptors lost to the Houston Rockets and scored 87 points earlier on Sunday.
Yeah, if you got any other questions in the comments, feel free to fire them away. I think we're mostly wrapped up here with what we wanted to talk about. I guess we can discuss Ben Simmons' fit, maybe the highest profile buyout guy in LA.
The Clippers didn't exactly need more athletic defenders who can't shoot, but Simmons could potentially, and I'm sure he was interested in being in Los Angeles for potentially a variety of reasons, but having another capable rotation player for the Clippers as they're, probably going to rest guys and everything else, like, it's good for them to have. I don't think this is the best situation for Simmons, but I do think he will help them.
Yeah, he can at least get them into their offense.
Mm-hmm.
And by bringing the ball up, he actually has one of the highest passing creation percentages in the league, over 20%. Now, part of that is because you have to let him have the ball so that he at least sort of gets guarded, then he can throw it to people. But I think it's really going to be sort of like a point backup center role for him. They still don't have a backup big that they love. Maybe that'll be Eubanks, but he's sort of been a fringe rotation guy. I think they'll give a look to that. It's certainly a tough fit with Simmons and also with one of the traditional bigs. So I think it's more like I think the pairing of Simmons and Batum as your two bigs could work pretty well. I mean, the big problem with Simmons, even more so than all the stuff about not wanting to go to the foul line and stuff, he's just not anywhere close to the same athlete that he was in Philly. That's been the biggest reason why he hasn't been successful, in addition to the fact that he can be in and out of the lineup. Now, the LA Clippers have had definitely some success with reclamation projects like Ben Simmons, such as, for example, Nick Batum and Reggie Jackson. And so this is one where maybe he could get back to actually contributing. I wonder what it's going to look like with him playing meaningful basketball. He had a short stint of trying to do that when KD and Kyrie were still on the Nets, but then he kind of fell out of things again very quickly there. So I still just wonder, like, and he can give them some transition pace also. Take up they trade away Kevin Porter Jr. obviously, so I think it's just one more guy who in theory knows how to play, and it wouldn't shock me if they get more out of him than people think, because they just have a track record of doing that. Ty Lue could do a good job there, but it also wouldn't shock me if he just doesn't play there at all. But it's not like he, in terms of where his career is heading, it's not like he had anything to lose at this point. Let's see if we got any other questions. Thoughts on Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton as veteran leadership? well, when they finally joined the team, when they joined the team after the All-Star break, I guess we'll see. I think they're just like I think the Wiz are just sort of trying to like, yeah, guys, you're really pretty pissed off to be here, so why don't you go spend 2 weeks with your family and you can rejoin us after the break, and we'll hopefully get some good, maybe they'll get better leadership out of those guys and try to get them to rekindle their careers so they can be retraded at that point. Yeah.
We could do this one from Muhammad. Basically asked if Jonathan Kuminga's role on the Warriors is redundant now that they have Butler, when also Santos and Moody breaking out. Should they have traded him? The challenge of trading Kuminga as the principal in a deal, and we'll probably get to the rumored deal structure with the KD deal from that fascinating Ramona Shelburne piece on Monday, is that because he makes so little money, and because the Warriors' other matching salaries are good players, it was always going to be really hard to make a deal that traded Kuminga and made the Warriors better. And that actually, if Joe Lacob is willing to spend, if you can get him at a rate that isn't like horrendous, which generally in restricted free agents you can, it would be easier to move Kuminga for a player who can help you either in a sign and trade or next year than it would right now.
Yeah, I would say more next year because of the base year compensation issues. If they
great point.
Try to sign and trade him this offseason, and he'll be their only palatable matching salary. I don't expect that Butler will be that, and it seems like Draymond is not someone they want to consider moving, although perhaps if the star were big enough, they might consider that. But to me, when in saying he's redundant, he does actually have a lot of similarities to Butler, and hopefully he could see the way that Jimmy Butler uses his body and try to do that same thing. So on the offensive end, yes, but they still need more guys who can get to the basket and finish beyond just Jimmy Butler. But it's actually his defensive role is more important
That's a
than
good
ever
point.
before. And he's had moments where he's been able to guard the ball reasonably well, never been a great rebounder or help defender. But now, since you have two of the best help defenders ever at their positions in Butler and Draymond, maybe you can just set it and forget it with Kuminga on the ball. But they don't have anyone else who can do that. I mean, you could say Gary Payton, sure. But he's just too limited on the offensive end and doesn't have a ton of size. And Guy Santos and Moody breaking out, I still would be interested to see what Moody could do. Watching him try to slide his feet with Ayo Dosunmu and getting blown by, kind of reminded me that he has some limitations there. He's been playing in almost a 4 role, and it looked good with Moody and Hield as the two, as the 4th and 5th Beatles next to Draymond, Steph, and Butler, because those guys can shoot, but they also just, I think, are too small on the defensive end. And Guy Santos is just too limited athletically. Like, he can make an open shot, he'll play hard, but he's not a playoff level rotation guy in terms of moving his feet. As the 4, he doesn't protect the rim at all. He's going to get any sort of an isolation, he's going to get blown by. So, like, he could get out there, play hard, give you some regular season minutes, make a shot. But I have severe concerns about him. I have severe concerns about Quentin Post and their ability to hold up athletically. So they just need another NBA athlete. And so, no, I don't think, Kuminga is one of their 4 best players. So he is redundant with Butler, but he's so much better than anyone else they have. They just have to find a way to make it work. All right, then. We can wrap it up here. Thanks so much for listening to Dunc'd On. And we'll be back tomorrow exclusively on Dunc'd On Prime. Talk to y'all then.